The lights inside the studio of The View buzzed quietly, as if sensing the storm that was about to unfold. A typical morning show set against a backdrop of polite chatter and political debates was about to veer into uncharted territory. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? And what happens when that collision plays out, not behind closed doors, but live in front of millions? Elon Musk, billionaire entrepreneur and lightning rod for controversy, had agreed to appear as a guest for what producers promised would be a lively but respectful conversation. The panelists had other plans. Specifically, Representative Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp tongue and unfiltered opinions, saw the moment as an opportunity. But what exactly was she hoping to achieve? To challenge Musk's empire? To score a viral moment? Or something far more personal? From the moment Musk stepped onto the set, there was an electricity in the air, a subtle tightening of posture, a stiffness behind every manufactured smile. Was it respect? Was it resentment? The audience at first cheered and clapped on cue, but even they seemed aware that something unscripted was lurking just beneath the surface. Why invite a man like Musk onto a show built on carefully curated narratives? Why risk what could not be controlled? The early minutes of the segment were cordial enough. Musk discussed advances in renewable energy, the future of artificial intelligence, and even sprinkled in self-deprecating humor about his public persona. The panelists laughed politely. Crockett, however, barely smiled. She sat waiting like a coiled spring, and then, without warning, she struck. "Mr. Musk," Crockett began, her voice laced with a syrupy sweetness that barely masked the disdain. Underneath, how do you justify profiting from industries that many believe exploit the very workers you claim to champion? Do you think you are above accountability because of your wealth? The question hung heavy in the air. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Co-hosts exchanged glances. Musk's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Was this a genuine inquiry or a thinly veiled attack? Was Crockett seeking answers or headlines? Musk leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "I think accountability is important for everyone," he said coolly. "But I also think grandstanding does not help the people you say you represent." The temperature in the room dropped. A gasp rippled through the audience. Crockett's smile disappeared. Her tone sharpened. "So you are accusing me of grandstanding, Mr. Musk?" she said, her voice rising just enough to signal the beginning of something dangerous. Musk tilted his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "If the shoe fits," he replied. The View, a show known for its fiery debates, had suddenly become a powder keg. As tension mounted, the other panelists tried, half-heartedly, to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But it was too late. A fire had been lit, and it was growing with every passing second. The audience, sensing the gravity of what was happening, fell into a heavy, charged silence. Cameras continued rolling. There was no cutting to commercial. No producer dared to intervene. Not yet. Would Musk stay composed under direct fire? Would Crockett escalate beyond the limits of civil discourse? Could anyone stop what had already begun? The answers were seconds away, and they would be more explosive than anyone inside that studio could have possibly imagined. Musk's steady gaze locked with Crockett's, a silent battle waging before a word was spoken. Around them the set seemed frozen in time, the muted pastels and polished coffee mugs standing in jarring contrast to the raw human tension unfolding. At center stage, Crockett leaned in closer, her voice sharpening into a blade. "You sit here," she said, gesturing widely to the audience, "pretending to be some benevolent figure, when in reality you are just another billionaire hoarding power. How dare you lecture anyone about helping people when you crush unions, fire whistleblowers, and dodge taxes?" Musk did not flinch. He sat perfectly still, absorbing every accusation with a measured stillness that seemed to infuriate Crockett further. Was it arrogance? Was it strategy? The audience was no longer murmuring, no longer reacting on cue. They watched, rapt and wide-eyed, unsure of who would emerge victorious, or if anyone would. The other panelists attempted to intervene, tossing out neutral questions, laughing nervously, trying to pull the show back from the brink. But Crockett was locked in, relentless, her voice rising with every accusation. Musk remained calm, though his jaw tightened, a faint tick betraying the war raging inside him. Finally, Musk spoke, his voice even but steely. "You know," he said, "you are exactly why people are losing faith in political discourse. You do not debate. You do not discuss. You attack, you accuse, you insult, and you think that makes you righteous." The words sliced through the studio like a whip crack. Crockett recoiled slightly, then recovered, her face hardening. "I am holding you accountable," she snapped. "Something people like you have run from your entire life." Musk leaned back in his chair, an almost amused expression settling onto his face. "Accountability is not the same as spectacle," he said. "But if spectacle is what you want, you are about to get it." The room seemed to tilt. Producers were standing behind the cameras now, gesturing wildly, debating whether to cut to commercial. But something bigger than ratings or public relations was at play. This was no longer just a talk show. It had become a reckoning. Musk turned to the hosts, his voice firm but controlled. "If this show wants to be a place where guests are shouted down and insulted without a chance to answer, I am happy to leave. But I will not sit here and be part of a scripted ambush." Gasps erupted from the audience. One co-host tried to step in, saying, "Elon, maybe we can just—" But Musk raised a hand, silencing the room with surprising authority. Then, to the shock of everyone present, Musk turned directly to Crockett. "You are not here for a conversation," he said. "You are here for a performance. And frankly, you are embarrassing yourself." The words struck with brutal finality. Crockett opened her mouth to respond, but Musk stood up, his movements calm and deliberate. Without waiting for permission, he addressed the producers off-camera. "I am done," he said. "Either she leaves or I do." For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The power dynamic had shifted, so suddenly and completely, that it left even the most seasoned television veterans paralyzed. Could they afford to lose Elon Musk, live on air? Could they risk the backlash from appearing to silence a sitting Congresswoman? Could they stop what had already been set into motion? In the span of a few heartbeats, the future of the show, the careers of those involved, and the reputations of everyone on stage hung in the balance. And then, with a decision that would stun the nation, the producers acted. A voice crackled faintly through the earpieces of the hosts, the director speaking urgently from the control booth. The words were simple, but their meaning hit like a thunderclap. "Escort Representative Crockett offset." The directive stunned the panelists into silence. One of them, clearly rattled, stammered into the microphone, "We are going to take a quick break." But Musk, still standing tall at his chair, cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "There is no need," Musk said, his voice slicing through the room. "Let us finish what was started." Security, hesitant and almost sheepish, approached Crockett, who stood rooted to the spot. For a moment it looked as if she might refuse, dig her heels into the carpet, and ignite a scene that would spiral far beyond the cameras. But then something shifted behind her eyes, a flash of calculation, perhaps even fear. Was it the realization that she had lost control of the narrative? That the audience, once presumably sympathetic, now watched with uneasy judgment? Or was it the awareness that, for once, she had pushed too far, and there would be no applause to soften the fall? Crockett glanced at the audience, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief. She opened her mouth as if to say something, an explanation, a protest, a final word to reclaim the moment. But no words came, only silence. Heavy, damning silence. With stiff movements, she turned and followed security toward the wings, each step echoing against the stunned hush of the studio. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every detail, every awkward breath, every shattered illusion. Musk remained where he was, watching her departure with a detached calmness. His hands were folded behind his back, his expression unreadable. It was not triumph in his eyes. It was something colder, something that suggested he had seen battles like this before, and won them. As Crockett disappeared backstage, the tension in the studio did not immediately lift. It lingered like smoke after a fire, thick and suffocating. The remaining hosts fumbled for words, throwing out apologies to the audience, to Musk, to the viewers at home, trying desperately to reassert control over a situation that had already slipped beyond their grasp. Musk finally sat back down, adjusting his microphone himself, ignoring the crew rushing to reset the segment. When he spoke, it was with the casualness of a man discussing the weather. "So," he said with a slight smirk, "where were we?" The audience, unsure if they were permitted to laugh, released a few nervous chuckles. Slowly, the atmosphere began to ease, the unbearable pressure breaking just enough for breathing to feel normal again. Yet even as the show lurched awkwardly forward, half-hearted interviews, forced laughter, strained smiles, the ghost of what had happened lingered in every frame. Twitter was already ablaze. Headlines were being written. Reputations were being dissected in real time. Outside the studio, America itself was waking up to the footage. Clips circulated faster than anyone could predict, first with grainy audience-shot cell phone videos, then in crisp, polished segments, released by media outlets hungry for clicks and outrage. Was Musk the villain, shutting down a woman's voice? Was Crockett the aggressor, turning civil discourse into theater? Was the View collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions? In living rooms, coffee shops, and offices across the country, debates ignited before the show even ended. The confrontation had become more than television. It had become a mirror, and as the dust settled inside the studio, Musk prepared to deliver the words that would transform this incident from a headline into a cultural moment, an exclamation point. No one would soon forget. Musk adjusted his jacket, pausing just long enough to command the full attention of every living soul in the studio. There was no need for a teleprompter, no scripted lines fed through an earpiece. What he said next came from somewhere deeper, part strategy, part instinct, and part the simmering frustration of a man who had been caricatured one too many times. "You know," Musk began, his voice steady and resonant, "this moment we just witnessed is bigger than me. It is bigger than The View. It is bigger than political theater." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Not a single cough or shuffle of feet broke the silence. "We are living in a time," he continued, "where honest conversation has been replaced by ambushes, where questioning someone's ideas is treated the same as questioning their humanity, where disagreement is no longer seen as dialogue, but as heresy." He looked directly into the camera now, as if speaking not just to the millions watching at home, but to every critic, every supporter, every undecided mind out there wondering what the truth was. "What happened here today," Musk said, "is not just about me being interrupted. It is about the death of curiosity, the death of tolerance. When people are so convinced of their own righteousness that they cannot hear another point of view without resorting to personal attacks, we lose something vital. We lose our ability to solve problems together." The audience sat frozen, absorbing every syllable. "And to be clear," he added, his voice sharpening slightly, "this is not about left or right. It is about a culture that rewards outrage over understanding. A culture that turns serious issues into clickbait spectacles. A culture that sees debate as blood sport rather than bridge building." For the first time since Crockett's exit, the other panelists leaned forward, genuinely listening. Their defensive smiles had faded. Their scripted talking points were abandoned. They were, for better or worse, in the presence of something real. Musk leaned back again, calmer now, almost reflective. "I did not come here today to pick a fight," he said. "I came here to talk about the future, about innovation, about how we can solve real problems: energy, education, poverty, healthcare, problems that do not care what side of the aisle you are on, problems that demand collaboration, not confrontation." He smiled, but it was a sad, weary smile, as if he knew how high the odds were stacked against that vision. "I hope," Musk finished, "that today serves as a wake-up call, not just for this show, but for anyone who still believes that shouting down ideas is the same thing as winning an argument. It is not. It never will be." For a moment longer, the studio remained suspended in that charged, vulnerable silence. Then, slowly, cautiously, the audience began to applaud. It was not the obligatory clapping that follows a commercial break. It was something deeper, more spontaneous, a recognition that, for once, a public figure had said something that could not be easily memed, twisted, or dismissed. The applause built, rising into a standing ovation from more than half the audience. Even a few of the hosts, visibly shaken but moved, joined in. Musk nodded slightly, accepting the gesture without basking in it. He knew better than to mistake approval for agreement. The real battle was much bigger than one morning show. It was out there, in the chaotic, divided world that had watched this collision unfold in real time. The producers, sensing that no higher note could be struck, cut to commercial, this time with full intent. The screen faded to black, not with scandal, but with something rarer: reflection. But for Musk, the day was not over. As he rose from his seat, thanked the staff politely, and made his way toward the exit, his phone buzzed incessantly. Messages poured in, interviews requested, allies cheering, enemies sharpening their knives. And somewhere backstage, Jasmine Crockett, surrounded by frantic aides and publicists, was already plotting her counterattack. Would she frame herself as the victim of corporate silencing? Would Musk's message survive the media spin that was certain to follow? Or, against all odds, had something genuine cut through the noise? The next chapter was already being written. But one thing was certain. For today, in that studio, Elon Musk had won. The world outside the View studio erupted with a velocity no one had anticipated. News outlets scrambled to frame the narrative. Social media platforms flooded with fragmented videos, and think pieces were drafted before the final credits even rolled. Yet for all the noise, one undeniable truth remained clear: something irreversible had happened. In the hours following the broadcast, hashtags surged to the top of trending lists. Clips of Musk's composed takedown, his indictment of outrage, culture, and Crockett's abrupt removal dominated timelines and feeds. But unlike so many viral moments that twisted in favor of whoever could shout the loudest, the reaction this time was different. There was no universal outcry against Musk. There was no tidal wave of accusations that he had silenced a voice. Instead, there was a rare, almost nostalgic yearning, an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, civility and reason still had a fighting chance in the public square. Talk show hosts, political commentators, and even late-night comedians found themselves grappling with the uncomfortable reality. Musk had not bullied or berated. He had simply refused to be drawn into a circus. He had stood firm, not for himself alone, but for the idea that conversation should mean something deeper than attack. Musk's team fielded hundreds of requests for follow-up interviews. Some he accepted, some he declined. When he did appear, he spoke with the same unshakable calm, refusing to dance the media's familiar waltz of outrage. He spoke instead about ideas, solutions, the kind of future that demanded fewer insults and more listening. Meanwhile, within the View's own walls, an internal reckoning unfolded. Producers faced backlash not for inviting Musk, but for losing control of their platform, allowing it to become an arena for personal grandstanding. Quiet conversations about the show's future began behind closed doors. Could it survive this moment? Could it evolve? As for Jasmine Crockett, her attempts to spin the incident as victimhood gained some traction among loyal followers, but broader sympathy eluded her. Critics on both sides of the political aisle questioned her tactics. Editorials wondered aloud whether the obsession with gotcha moments had finally begun to eat itself alive. In a symbolic move that would dominate headlines for days, Musk announced a new initiative just a week later, a foundation dedicated to promoting civil discourse and debate across university campuses, think tanks, and public forums. He called it the Open Future Project. "We cannot solve tomorrow's problems with today's division," Musk said at the launch event, his words broadcast live across every major network. "We must build a culture where disagreement is not feared but welcomed, where listening is an act of strength, not submission." The message resonated far beyond his usual audience. Universities reached out to partner. Non-profits lined up to contribute. Even some critics grudgingly admitted that whatever else Musk was, he was serious about pushing for a better conversation. In the end, the incident on The View became more than a viral spectacle. It became a marker, a flashpoint, a beginning. A moment when millions were reminded that strength is not always found in shouting louder, but sometimes in standing firm while others scream. As Musk stood at the podium that night, looking out, over a room packed with students, professors, innovators, and skeptics, he allowed himself a rare moment of genuine satisfaction. Not because he had won a fight on television, but because he had planted something far more enduring than a headline. He had planted a seed, and in a world desperate for something real, that was the true triumph.